Friends, family, fans, welcome back to another wonderful episode of Back Nine Bets, episode 9, the Scheffler Shuffle. The Scheffler Shuffle. Wow, threw my own little tongue twist into the title there right off the bat. So we've got a good friend of mine that's been cooking with gas on the outright market lately and is doing us a solid of giving us a little lunch hour preview of the week here in between Parliament sessions. So I really appreciate my good friend David Bileski, aka at Deep Dive Golf on Twitter, joining the show today on Back Nine Bets. So how the heck are you doing tonight, my friend? Tonight, today, tomorrow, wherever we may find you.
This afternoon here, Byron. Yeah, this afternoon. Good. I never know whether to call you Byron or like Model Maniac or Mr. Maniac or, either or. Mr. Maniac, I think, has a nice ring to it. No, we're very well. No, it's been a good start to the year on the golf analysis. We've had a top 5 selection at every tournament so far this year in the PGA Tour. So it's been a solid start and a little frustrating because we're getting lots of guys in position, and then the only one that we've had come through was Rahm. We took outright at the Century in play at kind of longer rods than he'd actually opened the week at. So hopefully that helped a few of the Win Daily team out. And it's one of those things where you just got to keep getting guys in position, and eventually, you're not out there on the course, and you get those guys into your fantasy team and let them do the rest.
Exactly. I think that's exactly what you're trying to get to, is just making sure you got a gap to try and shoot your shot. That's all you can wish for. And I'm taking an absolute note out of your book because I haven't hit an outright since Tom Kim at the Shriners. So it's been a hot minute for me. I don't necessarily, leading up to about 2 weeks ago, I don't really do much more than like a 10 times return. So now I'm kind of like 7 times returning, and I'm trying to give myself more horses in the race because it seems like outrights are going in that direction. So I've discussed that on the last pod, and just kind of wanting to get your thoughts on how you go about betting and just getting a different perspective, because we want to just we'll review Riviera in a little review, and then chat about how we go about betting, kind of, get your specialties out there, and don't have to divulge any trade secrets or anything, but just some basic stuff that you kind of that helps you along the way so that other people can also kind of get that information inside their head. And if it manages to match with them, then it's so be it, I'm trying to get all these different kinds of people. I had like Joe Nicely on, and now I've got you, and I had DFS Sweet Spot. They've just a nice variety of different perspectives on life, and betting. So before we get into that, rotoballer.com is the sponsor of this show. And if you go over to rotoballer.com and use code MANIAC, you get yourself 10% off. Use all our tools, all our research stations, all the DFS optimizers. And we've got an FSWA winner from last year on the team, and we've got me as a nominee this year. So we've got 2 FSWA gangsters on the squad. Go check out rotoballer.com. Use my code MANIAC for 10% off and start balling like a boss. All right, so that's cooking there. Riviera review. Not even the Riviera. It's a Phoenix review. Trying to review the future, yeah. But it's what happens when you're crossing time zones. We're in a galactic black hole. So who did you have in the running for last week?
So main one that we had, particularly for fantasy selections, was Scheffler. So this episode might be the Scheffler Shuffle, but you can make it an extra tongue twister and add Scheffler into that mix as well. And it was just one of those weeks again, like I said at kind of the top of the show, you're getting someone who's in position, kind of. He was one shot back of the lead with I think about 23 holes to go, and unfortunately bogeyed the par 5 and was under some contentious circumstances as well, with some rules officials and things like that as well. And burrowing animals was a topic of the week, trending topic on Twitter for a little bit there. And on that final day, I think perhaps maybe shaken a little bit of like bogeying a hole that's really a birdie, and you're almost losing 1.5 strokes to the field. But just couldn't make a putt, and we're sort of tallying up, especially on the back 9 coming in, where he was still quite live in contention for all of our players, and he had something like 6 of his 9 putts missed by 23 inches or less. So it's like, you can't do anything about it at that stage. It's like you're getting a guy who's hitting great approach shots, he's finding the green, he's giving himself the putt. If the putt doesn't go, the putt doesn't go. That's just one of those things. So he was our main chance. The other one was Johnny Vegas, who we've been following for the last couple of weeks. Just I think it's an interesting case of, you get these mental blockages that I guess people get, particularly in the fantasy space. Of you hear the weird injury and you're just like, I'm going to avoid it at all costs, and it's kind of like, I guess, PTSD from previous tournaments where players have, yeah, exactly, where Matsuyama's withdrawn on you at the last minute or kind of like midway through his first round, which is almost worse. And then you've got that residual pain from someone in your fantasy team missing the cut or just withdrawing completely. So they kind of avoid anyone with the injury tag as the Black Plague. But Vegas, of course, had planned surgery, which was all intents and purposes did at the end of the year. It wasn't something that was massively affecting him, and had that towards August last year, straight after the playoffs. And so he's come back, and his approach numbers have been very, very good. And he's kind of been priced as this outsider when, by all means, he looks healthy. He's driving the ball brilliantly. His approach stats look really good. And we've seen him be much, in fantasy terms, sort of $8,000 upwards kind of pricing, or in terms of odds markets, if you're going that way, kind of 50 to 1 or shorter. And then he's kind of like a 200 to 1 shot, and he's kind of priced at like 6,500. So we continued riding him, and again, decent enough week. Didn't come through in the final round, but at stages of the tournament, he was well within the top 10 through the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, no, we're discussing Vegas there, Evan. We are talking about Johnny Vegas coming back from a little injury, and how his game has still continued to kind of. It just started off where he pretty much left, and Dave's mentioning that you definitely want to keep an eye on guys like that, because they're out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. So that was a great sneaky play, and I can't wait to pick your brain about how you go about actually identifying these guys and how many guys you go through. But just want to chat about Scotty Scheffler for 2 seconds, yeah, because old Scheffler is just, it's incredible to watch him play. I don't know if he made a single bogey in the last 2 days. I don't know if he made a bogey in the final day, but I know Saturday was flawless golf. The guy just, he plays, it's chess out there. It's just this beautiful dynamic game of chess that he does with the golf course. And when he's firing, he's unflappable. And it's so fun to watch him just play, because it's just, you can tell exactly what he's going to do every single time. Like when he's missing fairways, he's still making pars in very easy fashion, although he makes it look a lot easier than it actually is. But man, oh man, it's been fun. And it's finally time that he's gained with the putter. And then obviously went nuclear with the irons, which has been happening with him for a long time now already. So Scotty's out here doing his thing, and now we're going to see. The first one he did, it's kind of funny. Data Golf did a little screenshot, and they shared his recent ball striking for the last 25 starts. The 25th start was Phoenix last year. He didn't even gain strokes on approach when he won last year, yeah. And then went and just became one of the best ball strikers in the world, winning another 4 since, which is insane. And it's something to be appreciated, because there's a lot of good ball strikers out there, but he's one of the best. So I love Scotty, and it's just unfortunate we couldn't bet him, because it's tough. If you don't have a lot of budget, you can't really go after guys that are sitting in single figures or whatever. So what do you think of Scotty this week there, Dave?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I kind of take the same vein of, when I'm giving out my analysis and recommendations for people, is you're getting these guys who are basically, their win probability has to be sort of like 15% in this like absolutely stacked field in order to justify that being value. And I guess I'll get into a bit of that kind of stuff in the analysis portion of our discussion. But Scotty's often in that kind of mark. And you're right in that last year's victory was kind of this like almost outlier result for Scheffler, because we know his ball striking is so good. And then the week his ball striking wasn't good, he actually managed to turn out and get his maiden PGA Tour victory, which was baffling. Yeah. But just looking at the stats from last week, he had 2 bogeys all week was the final answer. So he had 1 in round 3, which was on the 13th hole. Okay. And then on round 1 he bogeyed the 4th, but that was it. I mean, and if you're having a week where you're making 2 bogeys in the entire week, you're going to be somewhere near the top, and especially when you're someone of Scheffler standards. So that's incredibly impressive. We know what his approach game's been doing. The worry for Scheffler of late has been that he's been working on his putter strokes, and I think you and I discussed it when we were doing some analysis of the President's Cup, and talked about how Scheffler's putter was basically non-existent, and he was out there late at night after his round just trying to grind and find something. And I was like, definitely a wait and see until something kind of clicked for him. And maybe that's the start, is coming back to a course where he had performed well before and putted well before was enough for him to gain some strokes putting finally, because when he does, he wins golf tournaments, or he goes very, very close. And we've seen that with a lot of guys, and Scheffler's certainly no exception. Of the week that he gains 3 strokes putting, 4 strokes putting, is the week he's going to win the golf tournament. I don't know how many repeat winners that now gives us, but it feels like we're on a serious run of people defending titles. Max Homa obviously comes to mind. Sam Burns, I think, as well, was another one that we had over the last 12 months. But there's been a fair few people who KH Lee, KH Lee as well. So there's been a fair few now where people have come out and defended their titles, and it's interesting to note. I don't know if it's statistically significant or if it's coincidental, and that's something to bear in mind. Of I'm one who hates people who fall for a trend and just think that the trend now means that we have to play the trend constantly, because that's not often the case. I mean, random events means that random things happen. Just like when you're at the roulette wheel, if you end up with 7 blacks in a row, it doesn't mean that the ball's going to land on black again. It doesn't mean the ball's going to land on red next time. Like, it's a spinning wheel and it's roughly 50-50.
Yeah.
So it's similar to that. We can't read too much into it until we have some hard evidence of what that actually means. My working theory, I guess, with it would be that with a lot of these live golfers now moving, that's taken a middle ground out of a lot of these kind of fields. Particularly, we see that in the fantasy space. We see shorter priced winners winning more often. So I wonder if moving some of that centre ground in the field means that we're getting more of those favourites, and there's less kind of those guys who can pop up for maybe one good tournament rather than consistently being in the top 10 of those leaderboards.
Yeah, I mean, it's been basically Siwoo and Justin Rose who have been the 2 longest hits of the season so far. And granted, we've had some elevated events here and there, and some popular guys have absolutely cleaned up. And it's definitely one of the reasons why I've gone a little bit more aggressive on my outright card, is to get just 1 or 2 more of those thoroughbreds in my player pool, my betting card, so that we can have a few more in the race, because it's been dire out here for me. So I'm looking for some inspiration. I've had a few close calls. I've realized that both times Keegan Bradley has finished runner up to me, it's been to Max Homa. So that's just like, brutal stuff, dude. And one of my best buddies is like always on Max Homa, and I've always had Keegan, and it's just been like brutal going for me. But it's okay. I'm a positive guy. I will remain positive. An interesting thing that I want to also investigate at some point is Nick Taylor all of a sudden just had himself a day coming off Pebble Beach where he's won before. So maybe there's a thing, and this is a one event sample size, Dave, is there a thing about betting a guy that's just come off an event that he's played well at, going to a course that he's played well at historically? I know that's just a really random thing, but it's something worth investigating, because confidence in a golfer is something you can't really measure. And I believe that if you've played well at an event, that you should play well at more often because it suits your game, that could just spark something, right? Like we've seen these guys lacking confidence, and like Cameron Young, for instance, is going to be a very interesting discussion going into this week, because I'm pretty much a full fade on him, because you cannot putt that badly on the PGA Tour, and it's sustained now. It's like not even just a hit or miss type situation. I think he lost putting in 3 out of 4 rounds last week. Just disgusting stuff, or at least chipping or putting in one of the three rounds. He lost, I think, almost like 2.5 strokes in one round, like massive amounts of strokes putting. He's just got the yipsies inside of 5 feet. I think he's like sitting at 95% make rate, and then he's one of the best putters from 5 to 15 feet. So it's something mental with him. And looking at Riviera, you're going to have a lot of those short putts on some very grainy POA greens. So does he bounce back to a little bit more of his old roots where he's had success in the past, pretty much his breakout week, or does he just continue sucking on the greens?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of the moment, wasn't it, last year when him and Joaquin Neiman, RIP, we're going down the stretch together
Yeah.
at the final round. That kind of was I guess, the breakthrough moment in that sort of big time tournament where we saw Cam Young emerge as a real kind of front runner threat most of the weeks, even though he never actually got the victory done. He was constantly kind of in contention from that point afterwards. And I think you're right in some ways about the putting being a confidence thing. It does tend to be an earmark of someone who's confident if they're sinking putts. So much of it is mental at that point. There's only so many changes you can make to a putting stroke, but a lot of it just comes down to some mental fortitude and seeing the putts drop. Can build on that. So I personally don't like to read too much into the putting statistics, other than looking at people's baseline and then comparing it to the way they're performing, rather than just trying to predict 1 week how they're going to putt, because you never know. There's a real lack of information sometimes in the golf space, especially leading up into a week of what's happened on the range, who's played what rounds, how they're feeling, what they're working on. Like, we don't get a lot of that information when we compare it to other sports. Like I've taken the States, American football is the obvious example. Like, you think of the NFL, or the injury reports you have, or the reports of media attending the camps and everything. You get so much information that you can get into on that, whereas golf, that's still lacking a little bit.
Yeah, there's a Twitter account that's kind of exploding. It's called Golf Injury Report, I think.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
If you just Google or search it in Twitter, they've got like threads of players that are like on their historical watch list. It's stuff I've been drooling for a while now, and I don't want to be perusing through Instagram accounts and trying to fondle my way through fiance photos and things like that. I'm trying to find a guy if he's healthy or not. I want to just have a reputable source that can just give it to me right away. We've got other fish to fry. So we've got our guy Evan in the chat here. He says the extreme variance in golf is our day top 5 last week. Evan, love you on the show, and that's some fake news there though, because Jason Day's finished inside the top 21 in 7 of his last 8 starts. The guy's been cooking with gas. He's a definite consideration for me in the outright market. I haven't really bet too many this week, but J Day's been playing some good golf, and he's been trending in that direction. And it's going to be an interesting week for him this week. The reason I'm the most concerned about J Day is he's around the green game at this venue. I don't think he's been consistently good enough around the greens, and I think that's going to be a very important aspect of golf this week. But before we get into all of that stuff, Dave, you, to me, are one of my favorite guys to just kind of pick brains about anything, and let's talk about your betting process. So what do you specifically focus on when you bet on a week of golf? Do you do outrights and matchups and placements, or is it just particularly outrights? What's your specialty? Why did you come to that decision? Give it to me all now.
Okay. I mean, first thing I'd say is that I can't really bet on golf anymore, because majority of books have blocked me from doing so. So I don't have access to too many places. But I guess that's probably a compliment.
It's always a compliment,
if a bit frustrating at the same time. So main thing I focus on is, I guess, the analysis and providing information for people to then use as they like. I think the first thing to do is you need to. There's one error that I most often see punters making, and it frustrates me no end, because it makes me want to shake them and just try and get them onto the right path. And that's what are you trying to achieve when we're looking at golfers and analyzing a field? Most people's basic instinct is, I want to pick the guy who's going to win this week. And I would say that that's kind of flawed thinking, because what you're looking at is, I'll just throw out some random names and examples just to articulate my point. Let's take John Rahm. Let's say that we think that John Rahm's a good chance to win a tournament. What if he's priced at 5-1? Is that a good price? Is there, there's this kind of basic instinct of I want to pick a winner, and that's great. It's fun picking a winner, but it actually matters what your implied probability is, and whether the selection that you're making is value for money. And that's that change of thought process that I'd like to see in the majority of people.
Absolutely. So, I think a lot of people listening should be aware of not betting 5 John Rahms on a card kind of thing. So how do you go about
Well,
determining
but
your
the thing
implied?
is, it goes beyond that, right? So there's a thing called expected value. Poker players use this a lot, and the same principle applies to your analysis of the field in golf, right? So you're trying to find positions where essentially what the bookmaker is giving you is they're giving you odds of a golfer winning the tournament. And when they're doing that, they're giving you a percentage chance of that golfer going out and winning the tournament. And so we want to look for situations where the bookmaker might think that someone has a 5% chance of winning the tournament, but actually their actual probability of winning that tournament is 8%, because then we've got an edge. And then when we're looking at those situations, it becomes not so much of we're trying to select people who are going to win tournaments. We're trying to select people who are mispriced compared to what they should be. And the more that you put yourself in those positions, then over the long term, you're actually going to start seeing some results come through. And it actually doesn't matter at that point whether your golfer wins or not. And I know that seems a really bizarre thing to say, but if we take an example, last week I had someone message me and they said, final round, who do you like, Scheffler or Rahm? The thing is like, both of those could be bad bets. Both of those could be bad options, because on either side, the bookmakers got their odds built in. They've got their own juice that they need to make a profit. So you need to then look at the implied probability of what are those two situations, and is the edge sufficient that we can then be confident that we've got some information that basically leads us to believe that somebody is outperforming the price on the market. So you shouldn't try and bet winners. You should try and bet value.
Yes, I love that idea, because I've made that comment on the show a few times by saying, like when John Rahm is 7, do you think he's got a 11.8%, 7.5 to 1 odds is an 11.8% chance of winning? If you're just listening on a pod, I'm showing my screen here, and I've got this little model thing that I use here to try and establish a threshold for value for myself. And there's often times where guys, like last week was a perfect example. It was Tony, Colin, and I used Tom Kim as well in my player pool. But Tony and Colin were both sitting inside at like 25 to 1. And those just seemed like numbers you had to go and bet, because they two guys that were, especially Colin was trending in the right direction, but the implied probability of them winning was probably a little higher than the 25 to 1 mark, versus the guy sitting like a JT, who's always constantly sitting, because he just racks up top fives after top 5, but has won once basically in the last whenever, and it was from a million shots behind. So he's like one of those guys that I typically try and stay away from, or at least get on him late in the tournament. But definitely trying to just, snag one or two guys to try and out probability one other person, like a 30 to 1, 2 players versus an 18 to 1. If you don't think that other guy's got a significant edge over them, why are we playing him alone, versus the other two? So yeah, I guess I did a pretty poor job of kind of saying that, but I'm trying to pull up my screen and stuff at the same time. But
no, that's fine. No, I mean, I think you're absolutely on point with the same thing that I'm kind of saying. And I guess the other thing to think about as well is when I'm offering suggestions to my guys over at Win Daily and the customers who are using our service, a lot of that comes down to how you're actually structuring your card after that point. Because again, people like systems and they like routine, and they like to follow the same thing every week. Of we'll put $5 on this guy to win, and we'll put $1 on this guy to win, just based on on their odds and how they're trying to win like a nominal amount, or they're trying to pick a winner on XYZ number of weeks, whatever their system is. And again, I would still go back to that expected value of, if you've got a situation where, I'll take an extreme example, but say, Rory McIlroy's priced at 20 to 1, he should be priced 10 to 1. So you've got a really extreme discrepancy between what their implied probability is. Well, that's actually where you want to put more of your money, because you can be more confident of having an edge than if someone that you've got like a small edge on. So often, going back to Scheffler, as we were talking about at the beginning of the show, if we say, we think Scheffler's percentage chance of winning is 12%, and the books have him priced at 11.5. Well, we've only got 0.5% of implied probability to kind of play with, and there's going to be margin of error there. And one thing I'm always cognizant of is the fact that this is the job of bookmakers, is to take money off the regular punters. And that's fine. People, you know what, if you get enjoyment and personal gratification out of following golf and putting money on a golfer that you like, that's fine. And that's totally legitimate, you know, that can be your entertainment. That's fine.
Absolutely.
But that you shouldn't be doing it with the expectation that this is how you're going to get rich, because you're not. The majority of people who gamble lose. 90 to 95% of people do. And that's the job of the bookmaker, is they've got a whole team of researchers and data. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that your information and what you're looking at needs to be different to what they're looking at, because they are, at the end of the day, if you're all looking at the same stuff, they're going to win every time, because they've got a niche built into the market and they've got more guys, and that's their job, is to look at the market and price it as fairly as possible so that they don't get burned.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what's happening now with this. I think in a weird and very frustrating way is the PGA Tour's website getting updated, and our data is no longer available from them. So now my model is absolutely, it's like in the state of deterioration right now, because I haven't updated the stats for 2 weeks. So I'm like scrambling and trying to figure this out. I know Spencer's in the same situation. There's multiple guys in my DMs that all been using this free information, and now they've dried it up from us, and they're being a bunch of arseholes. So if anyone from the PGA Tour is listening to this, thank you very much for your kind support of the public and just the people providing good information for your product that you're trying to put out there. But just to get back to your initial comment there about when you have a big edge, I think it's called the Kelly criterion in a betting terminology way. Do you have like a calculation that you use, or a simple formula that you apply to a guy, or how do you also determine, and like also feel free to not divulging. I don't want to have people divulging trade secrets and stuff, but how do you determine a value? Like, is it just a mental thing that you make, or do you have a model that kicks out ratings, or how do you go about that? And then how do you know how much you want to put down to capitalize on that?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of things. I use the PGA Tour, and I'll do a lot of DP World Tour stuff as well. So I use the statistics that are available on their market. I don't use what you and Spence do and pull it into an API and then actually populate fields. That's not how I roll. I actually just dive into each individual player on the tour and look at all the stats that's readily available, and it's free on there. I use Data Golf as well. I think they're a great resource. Obviously, over at Win Daily, we've got some optimizers and projection models and things like that we use as well. The other thing that I use a lot is the weather. You know, I think that this is, again, it's one thing that a lot of people who are casual armchair watching some golf over the weekend don't get into, is the fact that golf is the one sport that is probably most exposed to the elements of any sport out there, right? Like, I mean, you think of the Super Bowl, like no matter which kind of stadium the Super Bowl was held in, unless there was like a home team advantage, like it was probably going to be very similar conditions, you know. Golf is a lot different. We're playing on a different course every week. Wind's a huge play. Weather makes a big difference. So if we can start to see an example where, and this is where I do think that particularly books are slow to react, and in terms of fantasy, right, once the prices are set, they can't change them. So when you're playing fantasy golf, those prices aren't changing. Well, now we can have a look and say, well, actually, since those prices came out over the last 3 days, it looks now that actually Thursday morning is like dead calm, and Thursday afternoon is like, 40 mile per hour gusts. Well, I can now put everyone in the morning, Thursday morning, stack a weather advantage, get all those guys out early in the morning and play that edge. And for the casual punters, I don't think that's something that they do all that often. I'd just caveat that with saying that not all weather forecasts are the same. And that's the majority of resources that I find that people use are free and basic, and they're not that reliable. And so there's a lot of different resources that you can use out there. I've got some premium models that I kind of use, and some radar forecasting kind of things that I get into. And so I really deep dive into that weather, and I like to release my information kind of the last 24 hours before a tournament, because I want to provide as much accurate information as I can for our customers to provide them the best opportunity to gain an edge on someone.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. And that's the thing is I know a lot of people use Windy. And I use it for my articles as like it's because it's a nice looking screenshot, but also I use a few other websites that I think you've turned me on to that I have to pay for, which is totally fine if that's what we're doing out here. I think that's what you have to go and do. But before we get in there, I have to clarify with Evan. Yeah, he meant that Hatton and M had to get in the water on 17 and Spieth missing on 8 in order for J Day to finish top 5. So apologies for the fake news there, Evan. Apologies on that. No, the volatility, and that's the thing is, you go to courses like this when you are betting. I think you can also use the type of golf course that it is to generate your risk tolerance that you want to get involved in. When there's a lot of water, I think you typically want to try and stay away from the absolute favorites as much, because you want more chickens in the roost versus one guy who can get absolutely waxed by Tom Kim. A perfect example. I had him for top 20, goes and makes a triple, hits it in the water twice in one hole. So
Or I had the same on the DP World Tour last week, where I had to play a eagle the last, and so they ended up finishing third, and then Scheffler was the opposite, and he couldn't make a putt all day on the final 9, and he ended up slipping outside the top 5. So there is going to be volatility that just comes with the nature of following sport, that like it's a random event, just like just like, as I said, the roulette wheel was a random event. It's just we want to look at putting golfers in position as much as possible over an extended period of time, where we believe that the probability on offer is not a fair reflection of their actual win probability. And the more often you do that over time, you expect that then you're going to gain an edge, which over the last few years we've been able to display pretty well.
Yeah. So what would you say are like one of your two favorite things to kind of derive a probability of a golfer's success going into a tournament?
So I always, first thing I look at is probably ball striking, so approach play, and I'd say that the other one that gets missed a little bit is driving accuracy. And so I think that gets glossed over a little bit in terms of if we're getting, it doesn't even need to be a spike. It just needs to be perhaps an increase from their baseline and where their previous tournaments have been, because we can then almost assume that, well, if that carries on in that same trajectory, that we're going to continue to see some improvement. Well, then this could actually look incredibly good. So sometimes I've backed guys who have been losing strokes for the last 3 tournaments, but there's been consistent improvement over those 3, and their driving accuracies also started to improve, or maybe they've actually gained on the field for driving accuracy. And then that for me is just suggesting that their swing's in a decent enough shape. The other thing I look at is compared to sort of like 100 round baseline, or compared to last 12-month baseline, or last 24-month baseline. So I like to look at, rather than a short-term view, then take a wider kind of macro approach and look at, okay, this guy's putting badly, but how does he usually putt? Okay, he's usually a bad putter, that we're not going to read too much further into it. But if we're then looking at like Denny McCarthy, it's like, well, he's actually one of the best putters on tour, and he's lost strokes putting last week, but his iron play was really good. Well, okay, we can sort of hope that his putting is going to revert to his long-term baseline, and then we're going to have some good results. So I think that, again, with the putting, there's a general theory, and like I think the base of this theory is okay, in that putting's a volatile statistic and we can't really predict it. And I for the most part agree with that. We want to focus on the ball striking as like the heart of the game, and then hope some people make some putts, because the flaw with strokes gained is you don't see how far away people have been missing those putts, right? It's like they've missed the putt or they made it. So we want to look at perhaps their longer term baseline in that kind of example, though, because I often get things like, Lucas Herbert, Taylor Montgomery, Denny McCarthy, Kristen Bezadenhout, some of these guys who are the best putters on tour. And then people going like, oh, but they're winning, they're gaining all their strokes with the putter. And it's like, well, yeah, because they're good putters. Like there's always been better putters than other.
Yeah.
Than
Cam
other
Smith
players on
is
the
a
tour.
perfect example.
Right. And so there are guys who are just going to be inherently better putters over the long term. And so I would rather look at their baseline over an extended period of time with something like that before I take any assumptions that, like, they made lots of strokes putting last week, so therefore they won't be able to do that again. Well, actually, if they're always gaining 2 strokes per round putting and then they gain 2 strokes per round putting, they're just putting at their normal baseline as they usually do.
Yeah. No, I love that, dude. And that's why I'm having an issue with my stats right now, is because it goes all the way back to 2021 or 2022, sorry. And then I'm updating it, taking it from like 80-20% to start off the season, then going, slightly away from 2022 and then incorporating more 2023 as we roll through to kind of keep up with how the guys, strokes gains are changing as they play the season, which is also why I include just recent form in general, so that when you get later into the 2023 season, you're still getting some good recent form mixed in there, because you want to see the difference in overlap between baseline and recent form. So I love that. I think it's a very, simple method to apply, and it's very logical. And I think it's a great thing, especially with the putting, because Cam Smith opened my eyes to the fact that iron play isn't just the only way you can score. You can have guys like him and Denny and the boys that can absolutely, and John Rahm's one of those guys right now too, who's absolutely just putting lights out. So it's interesting. I even adjusted John Rahm's putting stats because his short game has just improved in leaps and bounds in the last little while. So it's interesting, man. It's really, really interesting. And thank you for sharing.
You get the converse example as well, right? Because you get Brendan Steele and you get Luke List and you get Doug Ginn, who, like, on paper, if you're looking at like approach players like the be all and end all, like, well, this guy gained like 8 strokes approach, but they lost like 10 strokes around the green, right? Like, so, and they always lose 10 strokes around the green, right? So you've got to continuously look forward to that, like, long-term form, as well as, okay, where's their game been improving lately? Have they found a little something, keeping your ear close to the ground, and getting as much information as you can. Watching golf is a really good place to start as well. And I mean, that sounds really basic, but like, how many people actually go and then try and watch as much of the tournament as they can, or do they just like select their fantasy team and walk away and then turn back up on Sunday to see how they've played, rather than actually seeing what's happening on the course? You can actually find out so much information just from watching and being like, oh, do you know what? That was really unlucky that he missed that fairway and hit it in the water because that gust of wind actually came. It's like he hasn't put a bad swing on the ball. He's going to lose 2 strokes approach for finding the water, but the gust of wind was the one that changed it.
Tom Kim last week on the same hole, Scotty Scheffler hit a drive into the bunker. It rolled into a previous drive's pitch mark. So he had a fried egg, immediately hit his next shot 50 yards maybe out of the fairway bunker. Tom Kim was 250 yards out, hit his next shot 310 yards. It was on the par 5. I think it must have hit it. I don't think he's capable of hitting a 3-wood 310 yards ever. And hit it over the green. He had 76 yards back in and made a bogey on that hole. It was just the most ridiculous thing. Right after they mic'd him up, his whole round and just general demeanor was just hot garbage. He hit it to like 5.5 feet for eagle, the closest anyone had hit it on that par 5 so far. Misses the putt and then just unravels after that. So that's something that, like, you're watching all of this, and now Tom Kim's going to probably be a little less popular this week, but I'm still going to be on him, especially at a course that is going to be a very distance dependent thing. But I just want to show this. What I'm showing on my screen is this thing I use for my implied win probabilities and just to get a feel for a golfer's different range of outcomes. I've got all sorts of different, there's my maniac rankings, and you get approach distance, bogey avoidance, around the green play, putting, no putting, par 5 scoring. And you can just see, like, a prime example is Colin Morikawa. If you emphasize his approach play, he's 6th in my model, but he's only 9th if I just use my baseline, maniac model. And then if you take out putting, if you remove 20% of the strokes, like make putting a negative metric in your model to a degree, he's 6th again. So if you have a ton of approach and a whole less like random putting, he's obviously going to pop. And then last week, ta-da, the putting was atrocious, and he when you emphasize putting on Colin Morikawa's game, he goes all the way down to 12th and 13th, especially around the greens. So the short game thing for him in general is pretty poor. So let's dive into the board. Yeah, I know we've only got a few minutes before you have to head back to the big wide real world, but we've got ourselves Rory McIlroy sitting at the top of the board here, and I think the last time I checked, these odds are a little dated, but he was sitting around about 10-1. Scotty Scheffler 10-1 as well. John Rahm's the leader of the pack as always, because he's just never finishing outside the top 5 almost nowadays, and he's 7.5-1. So how did you digest this board, Dave? Like, you don't have to give us your picks or anything, but what were you kind of looking for this week? Who kind of stuck out to you for various reasons?
Yeah, so bear in mind, I mean, Riviera is an amazing golf course. It is incredibly tough, and I think we could look at last year as a bit of an outlier because it was such an extraordinary performance from Neiman and from Cam Young as well. So we do expect generally that Riviera is going to play a lot tougher. People are going to miss a lot more greens. Around the green game is important. I'd probably put less emphasis on putting at Genesis than at most tournaments, just because, as you said, those per greens, incredibly tough to read. You're going to see a lot of missed putts regardless of the quality of putter. They do get bumpy as well during the day. So in the afternoon, you'll find a lot more people missing putts as well, because those per greens get eaten up throughout the day as well. As always, Riviera, you want to be able to move the ball both ways. Nice high ball flight as well, because it's firm and fast and it's hard to hold these greens. And that was leading into last year's tournament. I think what I'd missed a little bit was the change in Neiman's ball flight, is that he was suddenly he'd traditionally been able to keep the ball extremely low, which is an advantage in some spots, but to be able to vary his ball flight and move the ball left to right and right to left and low, high, and change the trajectory at will was really kind of probably a key indicator that I'd missed last year, and that just comes down to watching as much golf as possible. So look, it's going to be an interesting learning curve this year with these enhanced fields, the designated events, because I'm interested to see how they continue to play out and what impact it has on golfers' games and who turns up. And I'm also interested on the flip side of some of those regular season events of what happens to them, what happens to their fields, and how do those end up playing out? Because I think that's going to shape some of our thinking moving forward as we get used to this new kind of regime from the PGA Tour and the new way that the tour is organised, of who's turning up at these big events, who's turning up at these minor events. Is it the favourites winning every week on the minor tours, or are we getting more outsiders? And are we sticking to the horses for courses kind of result at things like the Genesis and the players? So it's an interesting time to be following the tour and putting some analysis on it for sure. I do think there's a bit of a value out there this week. So make sure that you're subscribed to me on Twitter at Deep Dive Golf, and head over to Win Daily as well, because we've got some great offerings and a great team over there too. And and have a look. As I said, I tend to release most of my articles in the 24 hours prior, just because I really like to get that weather edge, which it looks like something may develop this week, but time shall tell as it comes to the weather.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And going back to that designated event thing, that's why I have Willie Z on my card this week, is because I know he hasn't been playing well. The numbers slipped all the way. I grabbed a 45-1, and we popped that in our Rotoballer Discord as well, because that's what we do over here. And I'm trying to, although we haven't been hitting any winners, there will be a point. At some point, I've been okay. So we'll bounce back. But I feel like a model's not going to tell you that this has a major type vibe to it. I think it's a golf course that plays a lot more difficult than most. It relies on exceptional ball strikers and a tidy touch around the green, which Willie Z's got a decent around the green game, and he's also not a bad putter. He's not fun to look at putting, but when he gets in these big moments, these major type environments, his whole mindset changes. And I think you can gain that from stats, you can gain it from just knowing golf. But I think there's some guys like Scotty Scheffler. He plays these really, really, all of his wins have been these incredible tournaments, WGCs and things like that. So there's certain guys that have an affinity to play well when the fields get stacked up against them. And I guess when the fields are stacked up, they're playing specific types of golf courses at the same time. So there's a bit of a correlation there. But I think that's one reason why I kind of lent on Willie Z this week. I know the injury history is a big issue, and I don't know if I would have gone there if it was 25-1. But 45 was sneaky. Felt like there's some value there a little bit. I don't know if you agree or not, but it's an interesting concept, and I think these elevated events, if you can try and take advantage of these guys that embrace these moments, there might be a thing there.
Yeah, just looking at the stats at the moment for Zalatoris, last time out was the Farmers Insurance Open, and he lost nearly 2 strokes per round on approach. But that goes back to that point of the long-term form thing, right? Like,
yeah.
There's the injury issue. Okay, is it related to his injury? Maybe. But the other side is long-term. Is Will Zalatoris one of the best iron players on this planet? Yeah. He is.
Yeah.
Do we expect him to lose 4 strokes on approach again? Probably not. Well, if that's the case, and they're pricing him kind of based on that information of last tournament's outing, then yeah, potentially there could be a number there. I kind of like another guy in that 45 range at the moment as well, which is Tyrrell Hatton. I think that he's getting overlooked. If we're looking at short game, Hatton's around the green, putting excellent. The approach play's been excellent, and he's on a very, very good run of results at the moment as well, including 6th last week at the Phoenix Open in one of these big time events. So I think he's potentially worth a look too.
Oh, dude, I hate that you say that because I obviously carry a lot of substance with what you're saying, and Tyrrell Hatton's actually on my blacklist because he was one of the guys that last season just looked so good, and then you'd bet him a top 20, and then on a Sunday he would just do his antics and just melt his way out of a top 20 and finish like 35th. And I was waiting for that. He was 37% owned in Sunday Showdown, and then he made that freaking eagle, dude. I was loving life when he went on a three-run bogey streak and then made an eagle and a few other birdies to finish up the back 9, which was brutal. And I just don't trust him. I've been burned. I've got some PTS Tyrrell for sure.
Yeah. But this is the thing: is you need to. For me, I totally respect what you do, and your models are incredible, and I've had a good look at them as well. And we've had you on the show and stuff with Win Daly over at the PGA Draftcast on Tuesdays 9 p.m. Eastern time if you're checking in. But with that kind of stuff, it's like we almost need to try and take that emotion out, because I had the same thing exactly with Will Zalatoris of had looked at the numbers, been like, we just need a good putting week from him, and you get tired of selecting the same name within your selections 3 times, 4 times, and you get burned. And then of course they'll come out and they'll eventually do it and they'll win, and it's probably the time that you've given up on them. So I try and detach emotion from it as much as possible. As I said, I unfortunately don't get the opportunity very often now to actually put my own money on to these guys. So I've got less, I guess, invested emotion other than wanting to provide a really good product and service to people. But, I guess detaching that emotional and looking at purely from a statistical analysis point of view of what profile am I looking at for this tournament, ignoring the name almost and just looking at the numbers. That's another way to do it. I've said the same thing with the example I guess I give is Taylor Montgomery when he was on his incredibly hot run of finishing top 5 every single week, in decent fields, and everyone was going but we've got Rahm and Thomas, and it was but if this guy was called anything else than Taylor Montgomery, he'd be 15-1 if his name is Justin Thomas. So we put these perceptions onto players based on, I guess, as you said, previous results and things that have happened in the past, and backing them and getting disappointed. And I don't personally subscribe to the blacklist thing. I totally get why people have them. I'm just I'm willing to look at every tournament with fresh eyes, with the information that's provided in front of me, and make the best decision possible on the numbers that sit in front of me. And the only caveat I'd give to that is that I do think that winning is a mindset, and I do think that there is a mentality, which again, that's like an intangible that you can't get, like a strokes gained, like
win. Yeah,
like a strokes game win, or like a strokes game like mental fortitude, or like,
clutch
someone who gets
factor,
that
or
fire in their belly. Yeah, exactly. When you get down the stretch, but it's, that's, I guess, something that I factor into my decisions as well. Of like, if the strokes gain data is like so overwhelmingly positive for a guy, and we're obviously, his profile fits, even if he hasn't got that winning mentality, I might be more inclined to go for him because the numbers are just so good that I can't really ignore it.
Okay. Before you get out of here, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Applying to what you just said, what do you think of Matt Fitzpatrick? I love the fact that he's sitting in the 40-1 numbers. He's great off the tee. The irons are one of his weaknesses. It's not an absolute weakness, but it's not any of his. It's like the weakest part of his game, I'd say. And then you get the around the green play and putting, which he's sensational at. Plays well on courses that you score lower on. Medium courses are one of his things. He's sitting in the 40s, Dave. What are we doing with Matt Fitzpatrick? Are we going to pull a trigger if you can grab a 40 on Matty Fitz, or do you think he's one of those guys that kind of just stumbled into a US Open by hitting it into the grass that everyone's walked over and winning that way, kind of thing?
Yeah, no, look, I really rate Fitzpatrick's game. I think his long irons are probably underrated, which is going to be useful around Riviera. I think that's worth having a look at some of his, particularly like 150 to 200, 200 plus kind of metrics, and then his wedge play as well, because conversely, if you're not going for the green, well, you're probably going to have an iron in your hand and be looking at like a 90-yard kind of number with like a gap wedge or some sandwich, or something like that. So, yeah, look, I think that Fitzpatrick solved one major issue with his game, which was driving distance. And he put in a ton of work with his speed coach leading into that season, where he did have the US Open victory, in solving what was a problem in his game and plugging that gap. We knew that all the other talent was there for Fitzpatrick, except for the fact that he was kind of giving up like 30 to 40 yards off the tee. And if you dive into his stats, you can almost see the exact point where it finally clicked, right? And then his driving distance just went off the charts, and then suddenly we're looking at a whole different golfer. I think, 40-1 sounds long. I would have to dive into the numbers before I gave that like as an official, I would play this guy kind of vibe. But I think he's got immense talent, and I wouldn't read too much into how people get it done, because as I said, anything can happen kind of down that final stretch on Sunday. But if you've got the guy in contention, well, you're giving them the best chance for having the luck of the draw, of landing in the lie. You need to be in that position to start with, and somebody's going to win, and somebody's going to get lucky, and someone's going to get unlucky, and it's about putting those names in those positions.
Yeah, many hats, as many names in the hat as you can, man. So I'll take a look as well. I don't know what number is sitting out there right now, but I was looking at all day today, and the injury news is a little bit of a concern for some people. I think the books might be taking that into account too. I don't think his distance has been as effective as it has been since his niggle showed up. But yes, dude, I really appreciate you showing up for me and pulling in today. I know you've got a busy day in your suit, and I'm just sitting here in my silky smooths. But Dave,
you look sharp, man. You look sharp.
Oh yeah, always. I do my best. There's a podcast coming out on later in the week that's got the shirt in it too, on another network, and I'm quite excited about that one. So yeah, so I know you've mentioned Win Daily a few times at Deep Dive Golf. Any other spots that people need to follow you at and grab you around there, or are those?
Win Daly's the main one. Like Spence does a little bit of stuff with that, who I know you've got over at Roger Bull as well, and so he's a colleague of mine over at Win Daily. And I'd just say, like, we've got pretty complementary kind of stats, I guess, in many ways, but then different services and different products that we all offer in the industry, and it's all about, I guess, growing the game. And I don't like to think of us as rivals within the business world. I like to think of, like, actually the rival is the customer versus the book, or the customer versus the fantasy, kind of a more of a us working together kind of mentality against the nasty guy out there who's taking all the money out of the poor punters who aren't selecting the winning golfers. So no, Win Daly's a great team. It's $5.99 a week at the moment for all sports, which is pretty nuts. and you can join us over the Draftcast as well, PJ Draftcast. We do a live draft on YouTube every Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. Some of the best banter ever in the chat over there. So it is great fun, and the audience actually drafts a team against the experts for the week, which I think is a really fun aspect of you as an audience being able to contribute and build this team to go up against the guys. So there's great banter. It's a lot of fun, and we've actually got a extra special guest, which I'll drop on the show. Is we've got Steffi Smalls joining us this week as a Valentine's Day special.
I love it. I love that.
She'll be joining PJ Draftcast this week as our guest. So make sure you tune in 9 p.m. Tuesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern.
Absolutely. I'll be in the chat there watching as always. I'm a big fan of that. It's one of my favorite shows, actually. It's really entertaining, and I love the guests. I love the trio or the quad of you that put it together, and just stealing picks from each other is just hilarious. It's one of my favorite things, and it really makes you flex your brain about pivots. It's a really good pivot show too, because you have to learn how to adapt on the fly and apply that kind of a concept to your lineups as players get stolen by you, which I know you love to do, Spencer. So it's one of my favorite things
100%.
to see.
100%. It's a lot of fun, and as you said, because of the format of the show, you almost do get forced into 4 really unique lineups that nobody else is going to create, because you can't take all the guys because other people steal them from you, or in my case, I'm usually stealing them from Spencer. So that's how it usually goes.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a fun time. So 9 p.m. Eastern on a Tuesday, shortly after my pod that I do on Tuesdays at 7 Eastern. So lots of fun stuff on Tuesdays there for you guys that want to get as much golf content viewing as you can. And Dave, thanks again for showing up and sharing all your knowledge and time with me this afternoon / morning, evening, wherever the heck anyone may be listening to this too. And cool. We'll catch you guys later. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 Eastern on Back 9 Bet Solo. And until then, we'll catch you guys next week. All right. Linda Q and Bileski out.
Pleasure.